Welcome again to this lecture, and this lecture is going to be about the progressive era in American history, and the progressive era is considered to be the period in the early period in the 20th century, okay? From 1900 to 1930. Now, I know even the word progressive in the United States sometimes can make some people's antenna go up, but the idea is that this was really a period of reform in the United States. Okay, it was, if you like, a period that was full of idealism. But before we go into, because I know I'm not going to be able to highlight to you everything in this chapter, let me just raise some important questions that are part of the learning objectives so that you keep them in mind. One, during this period, there's a summary of the major shifts in Americans' economic and social structure during the early 20th century. So shift in the social and economic structure. In other words, in every society, there's a structure to the economy and social relationships. And this period really experienced a lot of restructuring. Let me just give you, there's a book that I once read long ago. It's called The Roaring 20s. The Roaring 20s, roar. In other words, the economy of the United States in the 1920s was roaring in the sense that 1914 to 1917 or so or 18 was the First World War. And then after this First World War, during the First World War, the economy of the global economy was not doing very well. There were quite a lot of things really happening. But once the war ended in the 1920s in the United States, wow, things started coming back. The economy started roaring again, okay? So it was a major period of shift in the American economy. So just understand the structure of American society. And then second, one of the things that you want to pay attention to during this period is explaining how maternalism was a successful strategy for expanding social welfare during the progressive era. So during this era, the progressive era, maternalism is this idea of maternal, like being a mother, okay? Now, how do you understand this? Interestingly, this is something that is very relevant not only for people in the United States to understand, but people in other parts of the world too. For instance, if women are going to achieve their rights in, say, Islamic countries, it may not be easy for them to use the same kind of argument or kind of discourse or framework of reasoning that people use in the United States, where we have this language of rights and things like that, and then you use it in a very Islamic country to make your case. This may not give you a great purchase, or it may not give you a very good ground or platform to push your case, okay? So you have to look for something, some grounds within that particular culture, and then use it. I gave you the example of how Martin Luther King Jr. used the idea of inalienable rights that was in the Declaration of Independence. Declaration of Independence. He didn't cite Karl Marx, or he didn't cite British scholar or French scholar during the Revolution and things like that. No, he just looked at American tradition, and that gave him a lot of legitimacy. That gave his case a lot of legitimacy. So similarly, in this case, maternalism, during this era, one of the ways that a woman can get a lot of attention and legitimacy to her case is if her demands, or the demands that either women or people are making, are grounded in this idea of motherhood. It's very, very important, okay? Because culturally, it is something that was taken seriously. So if a culture respects motherhood very seriously, and you make your case grounding it on motherhood, it's going to be difficult. It's like I go all around telling you that I'm somebody who respects the family or motherhood, this and that, and then now you propose a public policy that, from all evidence, it is rooted in this idea of motherhood or the family. And now, if I say no, it means I'm ridiculing myself, because I claim one thing and then I'm doing something totally different. A good example of this is something called Mothers of Plaza de Mayo. Mothers of Plaza de Mayo. So the Plaza de Mayo is in Argentina. And there was a time in Argentina when many people were killed. So mothers lost their sons and grandchildren and things like that, okay? And there was no accountability. So the Argentinian mothers wanted to protest, but they couldn't use this language of rights that we have in the United States, like freedom of this, association, this and that, or whatever. Because even if these things are written in the Constitution, they have to be embedded in people's consciousness before they take them seriously, okay? So in the United States, we take this thing very seriously. Even if the police officer stops you on the road, he's aware that there are certain rights that you have. I'm not saying that some people don't do certain things that are strange, but generally we have this thing embedded in our way of thinking. But in some countries, people don't have this thing in their consciousness. So when these mothers wanted to protest the way their children and then their sons or daughters or the way their grandchildren were killed and no accountability, they did it on the ground of motherhood. And because in Latinx culture, or if you like Hispanic culture, the status of motherhood is something highly respected and very important, it became very difficult for the government to just kind of push them around. So they got a lot of, if you like, legitimacy or patches for their case at that time. So the reason why I'm just bringing this up is that during this period also, maternalism was a platform that was used to push for many reform cases about the family, about motherhood, and things like that. So take note of that, please. And then there's also a comparison of the success of reform movements before World War I, and then with their decline during and after the war. The war sometimes can create certain turning points in human history. And a broader thing that I want to draw even your attention to here is just that when you look at social movements in the United States, you will find out that over time their role has changed. Okay? I gave you the example much earlier of the role of unions. I'm really sorry to say, I know that some people think of unions as very dangerous and things like that, but when you look at American history, I remember there's one documentary film titled Sit Down and Fight. When you watch that documentary, you're going to, I remember when I watched it, tears were just rolling from my eyes, you know, and it was interestingly a documentary where you get these older people came together who were members of the union at that time. Because there was a time when workers in this country did not have much rights. People had to organize and push for these reforms. And the leader of the union at that time in that documentary, for instance, was not somebody who was just concerned about, okay, we are workers, we just want to get our salaries improved. No, they had an agenda about how they want more policies that would make the United States to be a more fairer, or to be a fairer society, a more just society, or something like that, okay? So, but today you don't hear very much of that at all, okay? So things have changed. So similarly, if you look at reform movements in the United States, it's almost like after a certain period of time, the reform movement started declining, okay? Okay, the question of incremental reform and struggle. The United States has improved to where it is today through incremental. And I remember when I was working on my doctoral dissertation, this was one of the things that I found out to be the difference between Malaysia and Nigeria, because I examined the role of ruling elites coalition in Malaysia and Nigeria on public policy. In Malaysia, interestingly, they persisted in incremental reform. You know, it's the same thing as savings in the bank. When you save money and then there's some interest you are paid, and then that interest goes on top of the principal or whatever, and then it continues to accumulate. Over time, it's going to become something else, okay? So in the same way, I found out that in Malaysia, the government engaged in incremental reform. And when you look back, you find out that this incremental reform has made it possible for the country to be where it is today. But in Nigeria, on the other hand, there was no incremental reform. They just sit down there expecting maybe some kind of solution that will just drop from somewhere or whatever. And so the neglect, this cumulative neglect over a long period of time can make a problem become big. So sometimes in the United States, when you look at it very carefully, you find out that there are problems that we have in this country. Maybe it will cost us maybe 300 million, 500 million to solve it. But because our elites, political elites, do not agree among themselves, they delay it, and after how many years, cost of that thing becomes like $1 billion or something more than that. Okay, so the point I'm trying to say here is that you do not need like a whole revolution or anything like that. Just incremental reform. Always make sure that you are trying to improve something constantly. And when you do that over a period of time, the incremental reform is going to pay a huge, you're going to realize that you're going to get a lot through the incremental reform. So when you look at social welfare policies in this country, you find out that this incremental reform has made a huge difference. And I think this is something that we should continue doing. And then lastly, in terms of the objectives, one of the things I want you to focus on or pay attention to is impressive economic growth, productivity, and progress does not guarantee equity and fairness in distribution. So what does this mean? What this simply means is just that there's a way in which sometimes we argue that if we allow opportunities for business to increase productivity, increase economic growth, things like that, then everybody is going to benefit in the country. Okay, it's like a boat in the sea or whatever, or a ship. When the waves come and they push it, then everybody in the ship is going to go together and benefit or feel whatever the experience really is. Okay, nobody is going to be left behind. That sounds like a very good argument. Okay, but what history shows us, if you go and verify this, and I remember reading a lot about South Africa, okay, you will find out that in South Africa, there was a time when South Africa experienced phenomenal economic growth, okay, economic prosperity. But that did not mean anything to the black population. And amazingly, we are dealing with the same situation today in the United States. You remember much earlier I mentioned something about the 99%. If you check the data, you're going to find out that a lot of the profit or the growth in the American economy is going to a small percentage of the population at the top. We are not saying that the people at the bottom are not gaining anything. Of course, some of them are losing. There's no doubt about that. But even if the people in the middle are gaining, they do not gain to the same rate as those people at the top. And there are a lot of arguments that some people really put forward. So when you really look at it, the inequality in the United States has increased in the past 30 years. Okay. Yes, economic growth has increased, productivity has increased, but if you look at it on a graph, you are going to find out that while productivity has increased, you will see in the graph it's way up there. But if you look at the wages of the workers, even though it has improved, but it has almost like stagnated in many cases. It has not really reflected the increase in productivity. And this increase in productivity, by and large, came through labor. Okay. So this is something that I want you to pay attention to, that the mere existence of impressive economic growth, productivity, and progress in a society or economy does not necessarily guarantee equity and fairness in distribution. I remember that when we talk about equity and fairness in distribution, contrary to what some people are saying, we're not talking about socialism or communism. Okay, I don't expect that I will come to the office and just think that I would be compensated the same way with my dean. I'm very comfortable with what I am compensated. Okay, so if I will just come and just assume that I'll be compensated like the president or something like that, there's something wrong. So, but fairness doesn't mean that we're all going to receive the same amount. The point I'm trying to make here is just that I may not be compensated like my dean or my president, but I'm still satisfied. I think it is fair the way I am compensated. Okay? So fairness and equity in compensation, contrary to what some people are saying, doesn't mean that everybody is going to be paid the same thing, but people have a sense of fairness. And I think this is something that is very, very important for us. Now, what is it that makes a society to be more equitable and fairer? It is the kind of institutional arrangement and distributional justice. Distributional justice is it simply means even when the economy is growing, okay, what is the mechanism through which the benefits are distributed? Okay? Institutional arrangements. What are the institutional arrangements? And you're going to find out that taxation is one of the institutional arrangements that sometimes we use to create a more fairer, to to create a fairer society or a society that is more just. And what I mean by that, for instance, we collect taxes, but then we create this K-12 education that is free to every American, right? So this is an example of institutional arrangement, because left to some people, they don't care about the public school system. But if we don't have the public school system, it means some Americans are going to go uneducated. And in the long run, it is going to harm our society as a whole. Because when you live in a society where a lot of the people are not educated, then you're going to run into some kind of like problems. So it's not just a question of only the people in my family are educated and I'm okay with that. So taxation, and you know this is a very controversial issue in this country, or using public money or the taxes collected to provide public goods, public libraries, for instance, infrastructure, road infrastructure, a lot of things that when we say public goods, we mean goods that are available to everybody as citizen. So if there's a highway, I can go and drive there. The highway is really good. We take it for granted here, but when you go to many other countries, they don't have very good highways like we do here that are smooth or something like that. So, or you have a rest area when you are driving. Okay, you stop there, you don't pay anything, and then you move on, okay? So these are examples of how institutional arrangements can redistribute benefits, even though some people are, it doesn't mean that you take away everything from the rich or something like that, but it's just a way of creating a society where generally, even if somebody is disadvantaged, they can see a pathway for them to move forward.